Hello everybody, this is Mr Matthews and this is a short loom lecture for all year 7 and 8 students studying Shakespeare. It's to do with references to science, exploration and nautical, that is seafaring terms, and the historical background, okay? So, science, exploration and Shakespeare, right. So first of all, we have a quotation from Romeo and Juliet. Give me my Romeo, and when he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with the night. And sometimes I think it's got endless night. So the stars, what did Elizabethans believe about the stars? Well, first of all, there was astrology. The idea that the stars were important in understanding you were placed in terms of the horoscope, your birth, whichever star sign you came under. And in fact, Queen Elizabeth herself was quite interested in astrology, and she had her own court astrologer, Dr. John Dee, who was a Welshman, and he was the official astrologer to Queen Elizabeth, although he was involved in real science as well. And apparently also it was said that he was what we call a necromancer, that is somebody who could summon up the dead. So it was said that late one night, he and his friend, Edward Kelly, went to a graveyard and they muttered some magic charms, and some of the dead bodies rose out of the grave. If you want to believe that, but certainly astrology was a big thing. Now, what about astronomy, which is real science? Well, in Shakespeare's time, there was a change taking place. This was the old idea of astronomy, which went back to a man called Claudius Ptolemy, who lived in Egypt. And he put forward what was called the Ptolemaic or geocentric vision of the solar system, where the Earth was at the centre and the Sun, and then the other planets. Of course, the Sun is not a planet, it's a star, but all the other planets, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn, those are the ones that were known at the time. Neptune hadn't yet been discovered. They orbited around the Earth, not around the Sun, which of course is the correct idea. Now, at exactly the same time as Shakespeare was around, you had Copernicus, who, even before the time of Shakespeare, had put forward the idea that it was the Sun that was at the centre, and the Earth and all the other planets, Mercury, Mars, Venus, etc., orbited around the Sun. And this was backed up by Galileo, the Italian. Copernicus was Polish, and with the aid of a new invention, the telescope, he was able to show that the Sun was at the centre of the universe, and that the Earth and the other planets, the Earth is a planet, so is Venus, so is Mercury, went around the Sun. And he came into conflict with the Catholic Church over that. They told him to basically keep his mouth shut. And only hundreds of years later did they apologise and actually agree that Galileo had been right all the time. Shakespeare tends to keep to the old Ptolemaic idea when he makes references to the stars. So I think if you go back to Romeo and Juliet, that idea of the stars was that, if this was a much smaller universe, this was the Ptolemaic universe, where you had the Earth at the centre, you had the planets going around the Sun, and then you had a fixed system of stars in the sky. With the new astronomy, people like Copernicus and then Galileo and then finally Isaac Newton, the universe became much, much bigger, and the stars were seen as being much, much further away than they were under the old Ptolemaic system. Okay, the other thing that Shakespeare was interested in was the sea. And in one of his last plays, perhaps his final play that he wrote himself, The Tempest, of course, it's all about a storm at sea and then a desert island. So this is the idea of exploration, which I want to look at now. So, exploration. Who would Shakespeare have been familiar with? Well, there's Francis Drake, of course. Francis Drake was the great Elizabethan sea captain. And Drake was the first Englishman to sail around the world. It took him 3 years. Extraordinary achievement to sail around the world. And you can see if you look at the red lines, you can see his sorry, I can't think of the words there. His route around the world. He didn't go anywhere near Australia. That was much later with Captain Cook. But Francis Drake was a great Elizabethan sea captain, and later on was very important in the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, which saved England from invasion by Spain. So Shakespeare would certainly have been familiar with Francis Drake. Now, the other area of exploration was what we would call North America, what is today the United States. And the first English settlement was in the Elizabethan period, and it was named after the Virgin Queen, and it is Virginia. And of course, there is still the state of Virginia in the modern day United States. Shakespeare would have been fascinated with stories about the settlement of the New World, which started in Elizabeth's reign and then continued in the reign of James I. This is when Jamestown was set up. That was also in Virginia. And this is where the European people came into contact with Native Americans. Now, the Native Americans were often portrayed as savages, and they were portrayed as wild and violent. And of course, these stories are coming back across the Atlantic, back to London. And Shakespeare is listening to these stories. So maybe when he heard the stories about the Native Americans, he used that for the character of Caliban. But of course, the thing is, there's also, although Caliban comes across as a savage character, there's also the idea that the white people were starting to enslave and treat the Indians really badly. And of course, Caliban is the slave of Prospero on the island, so maybe there's a reference there to the beginnings of slavery. Okay, so just a recap. It is a short little long video. We've got the stars. We've got astrology, which was a big thing in Elizabethan England with Dr. John Dee. But astronomy was becoming more significant, and the change from the Earth-centered universe to the Sun-centered universe, which of course is the correct one. The voyages of exploration were an inspiration for The Tempest, and you had Francis Drake and the settlements in Virginia. So there we are. Thank you very much for listening to my long video.